Comrades, colleagues, and good friends, welcome to Surplus Solidarity Sufficiency, the 8th International Conference, sponsored by the journal Rethinking Marxism and the Association for Economic and Social Analysis. I'd like to start by offering a special word of thanks on behalf of the organizing committee to the Political Economy Research Institute, the UMass Departments of Anthropology and Economics, the Graduate Employee Organization, Graduate Student Senate and Social Thought and Political Economy program here at UMass, and to Blair Sandler, all of whom provided valuable financial support for this conference. And very briefly, I would also like to thank a few individuals without whose surpluses and solidarities this all would not be happening. Vin and Marcus. Where's Marcus? Yay. Our conference co-chairs. Playing much smaller but important roles, Ted Burzak, Eshara Sheila, Mwangi, Sarab, Susan Jehoda, Jasal Kapadia, Yaya, James Meals, Kathy Mulder, Eric Olson, Elizabeth Ramey, Chitsu, Sato, Boon Shear, and Vera Topchu, who served as members of the organizing committee. And our heroic friends at Conference Services who have done so much for us, and to each and all of you for making special efforts to be here for this opening event. One unique feature I will mention about the conference is that we have a series of 8 sessions devoted to examinations of and engagements with the work of Stephen Resnick and Richard Wolff. And I'd particularly like to draw your attention to a special session tomorrow at 12:15, which is an unusual time. It's a special 2-hour session from 12:15 to 2:15, in which Suzanne Bergeron, George DiMartino, Sacha Gabriel, Bruce Norton, and Malia Safri will share their reflections on Rick and Steve's legacy. And we are allowed to bring food and drinks into the rooms, and because of the tight timing, I just would like to encourage you to grab something quick and come on down to room 101 for a very rich and frankly long overdue discussion. It's my great privilege tonight to introduce the Stephen A. Resnick Memorial Plenary in honor of a man who was our friend, colleague, teacher, and so much else, and whose warm smile, rich voice, combative intellect, and improbable comb-over will be forever vivid to many of us, even more so than the pain and strangeness of his death. If I could attach a subtitle to tonight's forum, I would add just 2 words. Words I heard Resnick say 1,000 times in class or in conversation when he would close one of his pregnant sentences with that signature phrase, the following. The following strikes me as an especially apt label for this gathering, since many of us who loved and admired Steve were precisely that, his following. Followers of that fearsome, well-appointed fellow who would test our mettle with blunt, I don't understand critiques of ideas we had crafted for weeks and years, yet somehow did it in ways that gave us the boundaries and the space to become doctors of philosophy. Of course, in its original Resnickian sense, the following is all about what comes next. Steve cared deeply about what comes next for the diverse traditions of Marxism and those of ASA and RM in particular. And I think he would have been proud to have his name associated with this evening's plenary as the entry point into a stream of fresh ideas and energies that we will collectively set in motion over the next 3 days, and that will surely leave their marks on what comes next for the various projects and conversations that keep bringing us together. Lastly, there is without question an art and a politics of following, especially in the world of ideas, which Steve Resnick modeled throughout his career as a scholar and teacher. As Steve struggled to find and define himself in relation to leading mainstream development economists, and later in relation to Althusser and Marx, he followed these thinkers attentively, yet always at a certain distance. He was the paradigmatic rethinker, a follower who found meaning in the agonistic liminal space between reference and rupture, a space rife with conflict but generative of new possibilities for freedom, or at least relative autonomy, a follower who was able to separate himself from, yet remain in conversation with, individuals and traditions he respected. And in his relationships with PhD students, he cultivated, if not always consciously, a similarly paradoxical mode of followership, of identification and difference, through the sheer force of his being. There's more I could say, but to stay within the bounds of my non-class position, let me now introduce my friend Steve Cullenberg, who locked horns with Resnick on countless occasions en route to his PhD in 1988. Steve has enjoyed an immensely successful career at the University of California at Riverside, where he was hired in 1988, tenured in 1994, promoted to full professor in 2000, elected as chair of the economics department in 1997, and appointed to his current position as Dean of the College of Humanities, Arts, and Social Sciences in 2006. Steve is also the individual most responsible for the tradition of international RM conferences, a venture he launched over the objections of skeptical comrades in the late 1980s, and which, thanks in large part to his original vision and leadership, has become a sustained series of conferences held every 3 to 4 years since the inaugural one in 1988. So as we welcome Steve to the podium, let's express an added dose of gratitude for allowing us to be here tonight instead of engaged in truly unproductive labor like watching the Red Sox. Professor Steve Cullenberg.
Well, thank you, Robin. Good evening. We're here tonight because of Steve Resnick. It's not the first time we've come together at these Gala conferences because of Steve. In a very real way, every Gala was a tribute to Resnick, which probably explains why I hated him so much. Tonight is different because Steve is somewhere else. Tonight we are here to honor and speak of our teacher, colleague, co-worker, friend, husband, father, mentor, comrade, compadre. Rick Wolf will be giving a plenary address shortly, but I want to take a few minutes to speak about Steve because I haven't had a chance to do that before. Now, to speak of Steve Resnick is to remember that he began his career very much as an economist. Steve received his BS in economics from the University of Pennsylvania in 1960. Only 4 short years later, he was Dr. Resnick, having earned his PhD in economics from MIT. His dissertation was entitled An Econometric Analysis of the European Common Market. He began lecturing at Yale when he was only 24 years old, rumored to be the youngest teacher ever in economics at Yale. These were heady days to be a young economist. Quantification was a new buzzword everywhere, and fixed point theorems and multiple regression analysis and solid growth models were the rage of the day. Resnick was in the middle of it. He was a talented econometrician and economic theorist, publishing such mainstream journals as the American Economic Review, RE Stat, Review of Economics and Statistics, and the International Economic Review. Steve was on his way to being one of the leading economists of his time, but Steve took his career in a decidedly different direction. Why did Steve turn away from the fast track to success and fame that he was on? Partly was due to his intellectual honesty. Steve was living through a period of tremendous social and political upheaval. The Civil Rights Movement, the anti-Vietnam War movement, SDS, and the student movements, and the feminist movement. Like others of his time, he found it increasingly difficult to adhere to in economics and refused to literally see the starkly troubled economic reality people were living, both in the United States and abroad. It was a very big deal indeed when Steve and that other Steve Heimer, went back to MIT, and during one of the first European meetings ever, declared in front of some of the former teachers that were now Marxists, committed Steve never wavered from the rest of his life. See, to speak of Steve Resnick is to speak of someone who is a deep and dividing concern for the working people and the poor, all those struggling folk, those victims of capitalism, Steve often said. That's why Steve became a development economist. That's why he took him to the Philippines, to teach at City College, and teach at UMass. That's what brought Steve to Marxism and his focus on a critically important problem of exploitation. Resnick was a mensch, overall a good guy who cared about people. Resnick loved life. He loved good food. He relished even a good pickle. Pretty funny, how good show you hear? It was a joke. He relished a good pickle? Relish a good pickle. Best I can do. He loved the Red Sox, and he would have loved them this year because the Red Sox are so damn good this year. And then working class Marxist kid from Boston, Massachusetts, have to do. He loved the Red Sox. He talked about them a lot. In Spanish, Che Guevara once said something like the following, quote, "Let me say at the risk of seeming ridiculous that every true revolutionary is guided by a deep feeling of love." Let me say it again. Let me say at the risk of being ridiculous that every true revolutionary is guided by deep feelings of love. This is from Che. Well, Steve Resnick was a true revolutionary. Everyone who knew him, everyone who knew Steve experienced his revolutionary love. And in true Camino fashion, we loved him back in a revolutionary way, of course. Speak of Steve Resnick is to speak of his deep respect for the role of the teacher. Resnick teaching was a dialectical adventure, where the distinction between teacher and student is blurred in the production of knowledge. Despite this, or perhaps because of it, Steve won every teaching award at UMass during his days. His intro to microeconomics courses were legendary. Students and TAs alike would struggle for a spot in his class. Resnick was old school. He read every word that grad students wrote, filling the margin of the papers with critical commentary, always written hard with a number 2 pencil. My opinion, the most common word I remember him using was why. A word he often used in conversation as well. I can almost hear him now saying, why, Cullenberg? Why are you doing this? He may have been old school, but he also embraced new ideas and new pedagogies. I remember how pleasantly surprised I was when I discovered his online Marx class. I was able to flip, technical term, some of my lectures in my Marx class. Last spring, I used in parts of his many lectures. Resnick was a contradiction, one of his favorite words, which he always used in a positive way. It was good to be a contradiction. That's life, and there's no way outside of it. Just as an aside, I remember when I came here from, I've been a graduate at Princeton University for a couple of years. In 1990, I came here for the first time. And I was in a class with Resnick, Marx class. It was an amazing class. I'll say something about that in a second. But I came here hating theory, because Princeton was all about mathematics and theory, and I wanted to learn something about the world. But all I got from Resnick when I came to the class was Althusser and Henderson Hurst, which seemed to me to be much more theory. It might as well be a diverse theory of value once again, but just in the Marxist sense. But I'd come to class every day pissed off because I had to study this stuff from Resnick, and by the time I leave the lectures, I would be so excited to go back and read that stuff as fast as I could because Resnick's lectures were so powerful. That's what this guy was like as a lecturer and teacher. He'd be in the class, he'd be marching back and forth intensely. The class was pretty amazing too because the people in the class, I guess some of these people were, but Sirach, you were in the class, right? Carl Beaton was there. Sacha was there, Richard McIntyre, Michael Hillard, Tom Dodges, and John Sneese, all AC members. Big class, a lot of fun. Speak with Steve Resnick. Speak of Steve Resnick, to speak of Marxism, of course, of whose theoretical tradition he is a major part. His theoretical and intellectual contributions are too numerous to summarize here. Suffice to say that together with Rick Wolff, he helped create a new paradigm of Marxism centered around two key ideas: overdetermination, class, and the circle of labor. Simply, had some powerful ideas. He also helped us build the journal Rethinking Marxism. He loved it and was active and a member of the journal for 10 years. I want you to just go to the website and just find Jack Redmond's tribute to him, because he talked about it more so I can't do better than that. So just go to the website, look on YouTube for Jack Aurelio, Steve Resnick. You see this wonderful website talking about Steve's contributions using the Marxism. Regarding these Gale conferences, I said I hated them. He hated them. I don't hate them. He never explained why he hated them. I'm so uncomfortable with the Gale conferences. He always went. I guess he did so out of a sense of solidarity. I'd always ask him to be a plenary speaker. He would always decline. Steve wasn't shy. Think about it now. I'm convinced that this conferences has to do in part with his not wanting to be credited for something students by and large put together. Following the speaker, Steve Resnick, speaker Richard Wolff. So much of what I've just said about Steve I could have also said about Rick. Their lives, their careers intersect that closely. There's some differences, of course. Rick grew up speaking French and German. Steve Resnick grew up speaking Bostonian, something he spoke all of his career. Steve went to Penn and MIT, Rick went to Harvard, Stanford, and Yale. Steve boxed and Rick played second base. Is that right? Yes. That's sure. How do I know that? I can't remember why I know that. Rick ran for mayor of New Haven and Steve supported him. Sort of. However, when they were together at UMass, they were one. This remarkable union occurred over many dimensions, over the theoretical work, over the commitment to the graduate students, to working with on RM together with us all in the early years, and with so much obvious enjoyment in each other's friendship. Website. Rick retired from UMass in 2008, is that right? Retired is a funny word because Rick didn't really retire, he just left UMass Amherst and he went on another career, as many of us know. And his other career brought him to New York City. He already moved to New York City, right? With Harriet, and both of them thriving. Okay. Social high tech. So we went to UMass, and we went to New York City, where they were both thriving. Eric got involved with the New School, teaching classes in the New School, and also in the Breck Forum, he was actively active in the Breck Forum then, and WBAI and so on. But then came the crisis in 2007, 2008, and it took off like a meteor. Now he's become the New York Times, said, the leading Marxist economist in the country. Rick Wolff, the leading Marxist, can you imagine that? Rick Wolff's the New York Times, the leading Marxist economist in the country. I was going to put up this website to use as a way by introduction, but we can't seem to be able to do that because we're not very high-tech here at UMass, I guess. But if you go to his website, it's just his homepage. It's laid out like a little matrix. On the top, it has all the topic areas that you can talk about: economic crisis, class analysis, Marxism, economic theory, economy and psychology, and economic democracy. Down on the left-hand column side, all the rows are the things, the way he talks. He lists iPods and webcasts and audio and video and lectures and papers written in other languages and so on. So you have 10 different ways he can speak about things, 10 different topics he can speak on. And the matrix is full of all these little cells of things that he's done. So these are some of the things he's done. He's appears on WBAI, the regular news show every Saturday. All right, Saturday. It's a pretty good radio program. He appears on Any Good Women's Democracy Now! Quite often, video cast, audio cast. He, trying to remember now. He was on Occupation, the Occupation Wall Street. You spoke there, didn't you? That was in video. I remember seeing him with the human microphone, Rick Wolff. You know, it was pretty cool, wasn't it? You know, I could tell. And the General Assembly there. And he's been on Charlie Rose with David Harvey, being interviewed. He has this bromance with Bill Moyers. It's quite incredible. It's kind of embarrassing, Harry, isn't it? You got that same smile there, Rick. You do with Bill. Bill brought him back. He put him on one time. He said, "Rick, I love you so much. I want to bring you back next time." Rick said, "Okay." Big smile. But to appreciate what you're doing right now is so incredible, Rick. We're also proud of what you're doing. It's so important what you're doing, too. And not only that, the things you're doing with economic democracy is really critically important, too. So I'm just so proud that you're here, and you're going to speak about Steve and what you've been doing, and keep on moving on what you're doing right now, please. Thank you.
So thank you all for coming. This is a interesting, but also, as you might imagine, a fairly strange event. It really is the first time that I can remember being back here at UMass where I don't have Steve to make jokes on my way up here to talk, some of which I can't repeat. And then to talk about the event afterwards so we can get a sense of whether we agree or don't agree on how things happen. So I have to do all those things alone now, and that's strange, to say the least. My topic is, oh, and one other thing since Steve mentioned it. The New York Times, which did say that, which Steve quoted, is so completely out to lunch when it comes to matters of Marxism that this is no compliment at all. They have no idea what it is, haven't had it, are not interested in acquiring it, and so finding me a paragon of what they don't understand leaves you with very little to be proud of it. My publishers put it on the book because they were convinced it helps sell books, but other than that, I wouldn't pay it much mind. And if there's representatives of the New York Times, I'm sorry. What can I say? My topic tonight, Sorry? Okay. Steve is going to tell me the full quotation.
It's from New York Times Magazine. The writer was writing about people who got it right about the crisis. And so he mentioned these other heterodox economists like Marxists, like Rick Wolff. So Rick Wolff is probably the leading Marxist economist in the United States, and in parentheses, this pissant little reporter said, that's not a very big, not a whole lot of competition there.
That's correct. I don't know if you heard what Steve said under his breath about that reporter who wrote the article. I won't mention his name, but he's now the leading reporter on matters of economic crisis for the NPR network in this country. He had previously been reporting other topics, and when the crisis broke, he approached two UMass folks to help him understand what it was. I was one, and my son Max was the other. And we spent hours and days going over with him what a credit default swap was and wasn't, what an asset-backed security was and wasn't, what the Federal Reserve did and didn't do. And the reward was for him to make that remark, which for me typifies the New York Times in any case. So, my topic tonight is about the politics that animated or inspired Steve and myself in our work. And so I want to address that, and I want to do it by talking about four arenas or four dimensions of the political in our work. One had to do with the politics of our relationship with one another. We're a very complicated business, and I thought some of you, since you have relationships with him over many years, either as students or colleagues and so on, would be interested. The second has to do with the politics of the family life we each came out of before we encountered one another. I should mention, I did not know Steve until I became a graduate student at Yale, at which time he was a young assistant professor with his friend Stephen Heimer. And so they were teachers, and I was a graduate student. That's how I first encountered Steve, and I'll come back to that. The third kind of politics is the politics of the economics department, and given the faces I see in the room, that will be a short conversation I will offer to you. And then finally, the larger political realities of our society that were so important to us. So first, the politics of our relationship. Steve and I were very different people. As Steve Cullenberg said, he comes from Boston and I don't. His abiding reality about growing up were two. These are what he related to me. I can only speak from what I know of him personally. He told me many times about his mother, who worked in Filene's basement all of her adult life, selling brassieres and a variety of other things, although he mentioned the brassieres rather more often, and for some of you that may be significant. And his father, who was a problematic figure in his life, absent a lot, and difficult for Steve to deal with. And in that way, he and I were similar. I also had a father who was mostly absent. I mean, he was present, he lived there, and like that generation, they didn't get divorced, however urgently they needed to. And so I grew up with these people who were together for reasons that nobody could understand. And I was confronted with a very problematic mother who didn't know how to cope with this situation any better than my father, but my father at least could escape. My mother couldn't, and that meant that my sister and I had to survive this complex society. but we lacked, both of us, and this is something we talked about a good bit, fathers, for all practical purposes, and had, how to say it politely, very difficult mothers. And one of the results of that, plus everything else in this society, made us very inward turning, very playing it close to the chest, as we say, of card players. Very shy of making much in the way of friendships and bonds to other people. And when, for a whole host of reasons, a few of which I'll mention, we separately came together, thrown together by happenstance, really more than anything else. I'll tell you the story in a minute, because even though it's a particular story, it helps you understand Steve and helps you understand our politics.